Mike Thompson stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his navy blue tie with practiced precision. His reflection showed a man in his early 30s, 6 feet tall with an athletic build that spoke of years of discipline. The Wall Street Journal lay open on his marble bathroom counter. His latest market analysis featured prominently on the third page. Who would have thought that the same hands that once grappled opponents to the mat would now move billions through the markets? Life had a funny way of working out, he mused, reaching for the small orange prescription bottle in his medicine cabinet. The label read, "Take as needed for anxiety management." But anxiety wasn't quite the right word for his condition. The doctors had a fancy name for it, acute hyperadrenal response syndrome. Mike preferred to think of it as his inner demon, a force that had both cursed and blessed him since childhood. Under extreme stress, his body would produce massive amounts of adrenaline, granting him almost superhuman strength. The first time it happened, he was 9 years old, facing down a 13-year-old bully who had been terrorizing the neighborhood kids. The incident left the bully with a broken arm and Mike's parents with a lot of explaining to do. What followed was a parade of specialists, each more baffled than the last by his condition. Eventually, they found a combination that worked: medication, martial arts training, and meditation. The NCAA Wrestling Championship trophy in his study was testament to how well he'd learned to channel that energy. His BJJ purple belt, hanging next to his Harvard Business School diploma, showed he hadn't stopped. "Honey, have you seen my blue notebook?" Ashley's voice floated up from downstairs. "Check your home office," Mike called back, pocketing the pill bottle. Just in case, he thought. It had been years since his last episode, but old habits died hard. Ashley Davis Thompson had been the surprise of his life. Former cheerleading captain turned marketing executive, she had quite literally bumped into him at a charity gala 3 years ago. Her golden hair, green eyes, and quick wit had him proposing within 6 months. The wedding made the society pages. Wall Street wunderkind marries marketing maven. Mike headed downstairs, briefcase in hand. Ashley was in the kitchen, her slim figure wrapped in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Seattle again?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "Just for 2 days," Mike replied, pouring coffee into his travel mug. "That's the 3rd time this month." There was something in her tone that made him pause. "The merger's almost complete," he explained. "After this, things should calm down." Ashley hummed non-committally, her manicured nails tapping against her phone screen. Mike felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The jealousy had started small, questions about late meetings, comments about FEMA. "Look, colleagues." Lately, it had grown into something darker. "I'll call you when I land," he offered, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She turned her head at the last moment, his lips catching air. The drive to JFK gave Mike time to think. He'd hoped the jealousy would fade as their marriage solidified, but if anything, it had gotten worse. His phone buzzed, a text from Emma, his younger sister. "Can't wait to see you. Dinner at 7. Mike smiled, remembering how proud he'd been when Emma got accepted to the University of Washington. Their parents had passed away when she was young, making him both brother and guardian. The merger meeting dragged into the evening, but Mike managed to wrap things up in time to meet Emma at the Metropolitan Grill. His sister had grown into a beautiful young woman, her dark hair and Thompson family eyes turning heads as they were led to their table. "College treating you okay?" he asked after they ordered. "Better than okay," Emma beamed. "I made Dean's List last semester." "That's my girl," Mike grinned, raising his water glass in a mock toast. Neither of them noticed the man discreetly taking photos from across the restaurant. Back in New York, Ashley sat in a dimly lit office, facing a man who looked more bouncer than private investigator. "Mrs. Thompson," the investigator said, sliding an envelope across his desk. "Your husband had dinner with this woman last night." Ashley's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. The photos showed Mike, smiling warmly at a stunning brunette in an upscale restaurant. "Did they?" Ashley's voice cracked. They went their separate ways after dinner, the investigator reported. She went to an apartment in the university district. He returned to his hotel. But Ashley barely heard him, her mind already spinning elaborate scenarios of betrayal. She didn't bother reading the rest of the report, missing the crucial detail about the woman's identity. Her phone buzzed, a message from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey stranger, heard you might need some help teaching someone a lesson." Ashley stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "Tell me more." 3 days later, Mike returned home to find Ashley unusually cheerful. "I'm planning something special for our anniversary next week," she announced over dinner. "Really?" Mike asked, surprised by her sudden shift in mood. "It's a surprise," she smiled, but the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope you'll be entertained." Mike felt an uncomfortable prickle at the base of his neck. Something in her voice set off warning bells, but he pushed the feeling aside. The next week passed in a blur of meetings and market analysis. Mike barely noticed Ashley's frequent phone calls to unknown numbers, or the way she would quickly close her laptop whenever he entered the room. On the morning of their anniversary, Mike woke to an empty bed and a text message. "Meet me at 8 p.m., bringing some friends to celebrate. Address to follow." He spent the day at the office, closing a major deal that would secure his firm's position in the Asian markets. At 7:30, another text arrived with an address in a part of town he'd never visited. Google Maps showed an upscale neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Mike loosened his tie and changed into more casual clothes, dark jeans, and a light blue button-down. The drive took him past increasingly sparse buildings until he reached a gated community. A security guard waved him through after checking his ID. The house was massive, all glass and modern angles against the darkening sky. Mike parked his Tesla next to several expensive SUVs in the circular driveway. Music thumped from somewhere inside. Before he could ring the bell, the door swung open. A man built like a professional wrestler filled the doorway. "Mike Thompson?" the man asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "That's me," Mike replied, fighting down a sudden urge to turn and run. "Come on in. Ashley's been waiting for you." The foyer opened into a vast living room where several more men lounged on leather furniture. They all shared the same muscle build and predatory gaze. "Where's Ashley?" Mike asked, his inner alarm bells now screaming. "Downstairs," the first man said, gesturing toward a spiral staircase. "She's got everything set up for the main event." The other men chuckled, and Mike felt his chest tighten. His hand instinctively moved toward his pocket where the pill bottle rested. "What kind of party is this?" he asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his veins. "The kind you'll never forget," another man said, standing up. "Let's get started, shall we?" Mike counted 6 men, all of them larger than him. Under normal circumstances, that would be suicide odds. But as his pulse quickened and his vision sharpened, he knew these weren't normal circumstances. Still, he followed them downstairs, hoping he was wrong about what waited below. The basement had been converted into some sort of private club. A small bar occupied one corner, while stage lights illuminated a platform at the center of the room. A king-sized bed dominated the stage. And there, wearing nothing but lingerie that left little to the imagination, stood Ashley. "Welcome to the party, darling," she purred. Mike's world tilted sideways as 2 men grabbed his arms. "Ashley, what is this?" "This," she said, stepping down from the stage, "is what happens when you cheat on your wife." She threw a photo at his feet, the picture from the restaurant. "That's my sister," Mike said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Emma. She's a student at UW. You would know that if you'd bothered to read the investigator's report." Ashley's smile faltered for just a moment. "You're lying," she spat. "And now you're going to watch what happens when you disrespect your marriage vows." The men forced Mike into a chair, efficiently securing his wrists and ankles with zip ties. a camera on a tripod pointed directly at him. "You see," Ashley continued, running her hand along one of the men's massive chests. "These gentlemen run a very special website, and your humiliation is going to make us all very rich." Mike felt the familiar surge building inside him. The room seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. "Ashley," he warned, "you need to stop this now." "Last chance," Mike said, his voice barely a whisper. Ashley laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "Or what? You'll tell my parents? Call the police?" She gestured to the largest man in the room. "Rick here handles security. No one's going to hear you scream." Mike closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing. The medication was in his pocket, useless now. "The thing about assumptions, Ashley," he said quietly, "is that they can get people hurt." One of the men snickered, cracking his knuckles. "Listen, a tough guy here," he sneered. Ashley began to dance, moving suggestively against Rick's massive frame. "Start recording," she commanded. A red light blinked on the camera. Mike felt the familiar surge of adrenaline flooding his system. His vision sharpened, colors becoming almost painfully bright. The zip ties bit into his wrists as his muscles began to expand. "You know what's funny?" Rick said, running his hands over Ashley's body. "We've done this dozen times, but never had a guy built like you. Usually they're soft, office types." Mike's pulse thundered in his ears. "Most of them break down crying," another man added, begging us to stop. The zip ties were starting to stretch. "But you," Rick continued, "you just sit there all calm. That's going to change real soon." Ashley moaned as Rick kissed her neck. "Watch closely, honey," she taunted Mike. "This is what a real man looks like." The zip ties snapped. Later, when the police reviewed the security footage, they would describe it as unlike anything we've ever seen. The chair exploded outward as Mike stood. Before anyone could react, he had covered the distance to the stage in 2 strides. Rick barely had time to turn before Mike's hand closed around his throat. The larger man's feet left the ground. What the foo dash was all he managed before Mike threw him. Rick crashed through the bar, bottles shattering around his unconscious form. Ashley screamed, scrambling backward. 2 men rushed Mike from different directions. He caught the first one's punch, twisting until something snapped. The second man managed to land a hit, but Mike barely seemed to notice. He grabbed the man's shirt and literally tossed him across the room. "Get him," someone shouted. Mike moved like a force of nature. Years of wrestling and BJJ training, combined with his condition, made him unstoppable. A knife appeared in someone's hand. Seconds later, that same knife pinned the wielder's hand to a wooden table. The man's screams joined the chaos. One by one, they fell. Some trying to fight, others attempting to flee. None made it to the stairs. When it was over, Mike stood amid the carnage, his shirt torn, breathing heavily. 7 men lay scattered around the basement in various states of unconsciousness. Ashley cowered in a corner, wrapped in someone's discarded jacket. "Mike," she whimpered, "please." He turned to her, his eyes still blazing with unnatural intensity. "I'm calling the police," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "Don't move." His hand shook slightly as he dialed 911. "I need to report an attempted assault," he said into the phone. "Multiple attackers. Some need medical attention." He gave the address, then sank into an undamaged chair. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving him drained. Sirens wailed in the distance. By the time the police arrived, Mike had taken one of his pills and was starting to feel more like himself. The basement looked like a war zone. Officers secured the scene, paramedics tending to the unconscious men. A detective named Harris introduced himself, taking in the scene with practiced professionalism. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "I'm going to need you to explain exactly what happened here." Mike told him everything. The dinner with his sister, the private investigator, Ashley's surprise party. "Can you show me the video?" Harris asked. They played back the security footage. Harris whistled softly. In 20 years on the force, I've never seen anything like that. Self-defense seems pretty clear-cut. He turned to Mike. But what you did, that's not normal. Mike explained about his condition, the medical documentation, the years of training to keep it under control. Harris nodded, making notes. We've been tracking these guys for months, he revealed. They run a revenge porn website, specializing in what they call husband humiliation. Several victims have committed suicide. Mike felt sick. What happens now? Now, Harris said, we arrest them all, including your wife. She's going away for a long time. Ashley was let out in handcuffs, still wrapped in the jacket. Mike, please, she begged as they passed. It was a mistake. I'm sorry. He turned away, unable to look at her. The paramedics wanted to take him to the hospital, but Mike refused. His body was sore, but nothing was broken. Detective Harris gave him his card. We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement. Also, he added quietly, you might want to lawyer up. Not for criminal charges. This was clearly self-defense. But civil suits? You could take these guys for everything they've got. Mike nodded numbly. The drive home was a blur. He parked in his garage, noting absently that Ashley's car was still at that house. Inside, the house felt cavernous and empty. He poured himself a drink, hands still trembling slightly. His phone had several missed calls from Emma. He couldn't deal with that right now. Instead, he called his firm's legal department. Jack, it's Mike Thompson. I need a referral for a divorce attorney. The best you know. He spent the next hour explaining the situation to the lawyer. By the time he hung up, exhaustion had set in completely. Upstairs, he stripped off his ruined clothes. The hot shower helped, but couldn't wash away the memory of Ashley's betrayal. In bed, sleep proved elusive. His mind kept replaying the events of the night, the sounds of breaking bones, the look of terror in Ashley's eyes. His phone buzzed, a text from Detective Harris. Thought you should know. We found similar videos on their server. At least 15 other victims. You may have saved lives tonight. Mike stared at the message for a long time. Finally, he took another pill and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring police statements, lawyers, divorce proceedings. But for now, he just needed to sleep. In the darkness, his last thought was of Ashley. How someone he had loved so completely could betray him so thoroughly. The dreams, when they came, were violent. He woke several times, drenched in sweat. Each time, he had to remind himself that it was over, that he was safe, that Ashley could never hurt him again. But deep down, he knew nothing would ever be the same. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Mike's phone wouldn't stop ringing. The story had leaked to the press. Wall Street executive thwarts underground crime ring. The headlines were everywhere. His firm's PR team was working overtime to control the narrative. Jenny Hawkins, the divorce attorney, arrived at his house precisely at 9 a.m. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Walk me through everything again, she said, setting up her laptop. Mike recounted the events, watching her expression darken. This is beyond a simple divorce case, she said finally. We're looking at criminal conspiracy, attempted sexual assault, fraud. She typed rapidly. The good news? You'll get everything in the settlement. The bad news? This is going to be very public. Mike nodded, running a hand through his hair. I don't care about the money, he said. I just want it over. Jenny's eyes softened slightly. You should also consider therapy. Trauma like this doesn't just go away. She recommended a specialist, Dr. Sarah Chun. She works with assault survivors, has experience with high-profile cases. Mike made an appointment for the following day. The police station was next. Detective Harris had a conference room ready. 2 FBI agents were present. This goes beyond state lines, Harris explained. These guys operated in multiple jurisdictions. Mike spent 3 hours giving his statement. The agents showed him evidence from the website. Dozens of victims across the country. Millions in blackmail payments. "You did us a huge favor," one agent said. "We've been building a case for months. Your incident gave us probable cause for a nationwide sweep." They had questions about his condition. Mike provided medical records, documentation of previous incidents. The agents exchanged looks. "Have you considered government work?" one asked. Mike declined politely. Back home, he finally called Emma. "Oh my God, Mike," she exclaimed. "I just saw the news. Are you okay?" He assured her he was fine, explained about Ashley's jealousy, the misunderstanding about their dinner. Emma was silent for a long moment. "I'll kill her," she said finally. Mike managed a weak laugh. "Get in line." The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings. Ashley's parents tried to contact him. He directed them to Jenny. The criminal trial was fast-tracked. Too much evidence to dispute. Ashley pleaded guilty to all charges. 20 years, with possibility of parole after 15. The men received harsher sentences, 25 to life. Their website was shut down. Assets seized. Mike received a substantial settlement, $7 million. He donated most of it to organizations supporting abuse survivors. Dr. Chen helped him process the trauma. "Your condition," she said during one session, "it saved your life. But it also scares you." Mike nodded. "I always thought of it as a curse. Maybe it's not that simple." Months passed. Mike threw himself into work, started training at a new BJJ gym. The nightmares became less frequent. Then came the news about Rick. Prison riot. He didn't survive. 2 days later, another conspirator was found hanging in his cell. The others met similar fates. Only Steve escaped during a prison transfer. Made it to Mexico. Mike received updates from Detective Harris. Read them without comment. A year after the incident, Mike attended a charity gala, his firm's annual fundraiser. He almost didn't go. Dr. Chin encouraged him. "You can't hide forever." The event was at the Plaza Hotel, same place he'd first met Ashley. He was at the bar when someone bumped into him. "I'm so sorry." He turned to find a woman with auburn hair and kind eyes. "I'm such a klutz," she said, dabbing at his jacket. Sarah Mitchell, pediatric surgeon. Mike found himself smiling. Mike Thompson. Recognition flickered in her eyes. The Wall Street guy? He tensed, waiting for the usual questions. Instead, she said, "I heard you donated to the Survivors Fund. My hospital received some of that money. It's helped a lot of people." They talked for hours. She didn't press about Ashley, didn't mention the incident, just shared stories about her work, her passion for helping children. At the end of the night, they exchanged numbers. Mike felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. 3 days later, Detective Harris CA said, "Thought you should know. Steve was found in Mexico. Local authorities say he had a fatal accident. Chainsaw accident, apparently." Mike said nothing. Remembered the briefcase. The man in the bar. Some debts had to be paid. That night, he had dinner with Sarah. She talked about her latest surgery, a 7-year-old's heart. "Sometimes bad things happen," she said, "but that doesn't mean we stop living." Mike looked at her across the table, saw understanding in her eyes. "No," he said softly, "it doesn't." Outside, the city hummed with life. Second chances. New beginnings. The past was behind him, and for the first time in a long time, Mike Thompson slept without nightmares.